The morning rain drummed against the tall windows of the Hartford mansion, creating a rhythm that seemed to match the hurried footsteps echoing through the marble hallways. Grace Williams moved quickly but quietly, her worn sneakers making barely a whisper against the polished floors as she carried a tray of breakfast items toward the east wing. At 28 years old, Grace had worked as a domestic helper for nearly 6 years, moving from one wealthy household to another. Her dark skin glistened slightly with perspiration from the morning's work, and her hair was pulled back into a neat bun beneath a simple white headband. She wore the standard uniform required by the Hartford household, a crisp white blouse and navy blue skirt that had seen better days but was always impeccably clean. The Hartford mansion stood as one of the most impressive estates in the exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood of Boston. With 42 rooms spread across 3 floors, it housed the family of Jonathan Hartford, a technology billionaire whose software company had revolutionized cloud computing systems worldwide. His wealth was estimated at over $8 billion, making him one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. Grace had been working for the Hartford family for 8 months now, longer than she had stayed with any previous employer. The job paid better than most domestic positions, but it came with its own set of challenges. Mrs. Patricia Hartford, Jonathan's wife, was a demanding woman who had grown up in old Boston money and expected perfection in every detail of her household management. She was tall and elegant, with platinum blonde hair that was always perfectly styled, and she wore designer clothes that cost more than Grace earned in 6 months. The couple had one child together, 7-year-old Marcus Hartford, a bright boy with sandy brown hair and curious green eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Marcus was different from other wealthy children Grace had encountered in her work. While many of them were spoiled and demanding, Marcus was polite and thoughtful, though he often seemed lonely in the vast mansion. Grace knocked gently on Marcus's bedroom door before entering. The room was enormous, decorated with expensive toys and furniture that most children could only dream of. A king-sized bed dominated one corner, while the other areas were filled with educational games, books, and electronic devices. Despite all these luxuries, Marcus often seemed sad, especially in the mornings when his parents were busy with their own schedules. "Good morning, Marcus," Grace said softly, setting the breakfast tray on the small table by the window. "I brought your favorite pancakes with fresh strawberries." Marcus looked up from where he sat on his bed, still in his pajamas. His face brightened when he saw Grace, and he immediately climbed down to join her at the table. This had become their morning routine over the past few months, ever since Grace noticed that Marcus usually ate breakfast alone while his parents attended to business calls or prepared for their social obligations. "Grace, will you stay while I eat?" Marcus asked, his voice hopeful. "Mom and Dad left early for some important meeting, and Mrs. Henderson is busy with the grocery delivery." Mrs. Henderson was the head housekeeper, a stern woman in her 60s who ran the household staff with military precision. While she was efficient and professional, she had little patience for spending extra time with Marcus beyond her required duties. "Of course, sweetheart," Grace replied, sitting down across from him. "Tell me what you learned in your tutoring session yesterday." Marcus had private tutors who came to the house for his education rather than attending a traditional school. His parents believed this would give him a better, more personalized education while protecting him from what they saw as the negative influences of public schooling. However, this arrangement meant that Marcus had very few opportunities to interact with children his own age. As Marcus ate his pancakes, he began talking excitedly about a science experiment his tutor had shown him involving magnets and metal filings. Grace listened carefully, asking questions and showing genuine interest in his explanations. She had always been good with children, perhaps because she remembered her own childhood when adult attention and kindness had been rare and precious. Grace had grown up in a poor neighborhood in Detroit, raised by her grandmother after her mother died in a car accident when Grace was only 5 years old. Her grandmother, Eleanor Williams, had worked multiple cleaning jobs to make ends meet, often bringing Grace along to the offices and homes where she worked. It was there that Grace learned the value of hard work and developed her skills in domestic management. Despite their financial struggles, Eleanor had insisted that Grace focus on her education. Grace had been an excellent student, earning a scholarship to study business administration at a local community college. She had dreams of starting her own cleaning service company, but those plans were put on hold when her grandmother became ill with diabetes and needed expensive medical care. After Eleanor passed away 3 years ago, Grace found herself alone and deeply in debt from medical bills. She took the first domestic job she could find, planning to work just long enough to pay off the debt and save money for her business dreams. However, she discovered that she genuinely enjoyed caring for families, especially children who reminded her of her own need for kindness and attention during her difficult childhood. "Grace, do you think my dad likes me?" Marcus asked suddenly, interrupting her thoughts. The question caught Grace off guard. She looked at the young boy, noticing the uncertainty in his green eyes. "Of course he likes you, honey. You're his son, and he loves you very much. But he's always working," Marcus said, pushing a piece of strawberry around on his plate. "Even when he's home, he's on his phone or computer. Mom says I shouldn't bother him because his work is very important and makes us rich." Grace felt her heart tighten at the sadness in Marcus's voice. She had observed the Hartford family dynamics during her months of employment and had noticed that Jonathan rarely spent quality time with his son. When he was home, which wasn't often, he seemed distracted and focused on business matters even during family meals. "Your father works very hard to provide for your family," Grace said carefully, not wanting to speak negatively about her employers. Sometimes adults get so focused on their responsibilities that they forget to show their love in ways that children can understand. But that doesn't mean the love isn't there. Marcus nodded, but he still looked unconvinced. Grace made a mental note to find ways to encourage more interaction between father and son when opportunities arose. After Marcus finished breakfast, Grace helped him get dressed for his morning tutoring session. As she was organizing his school materials, she heard the sound of a car pulling into the circular driveway. Looking out the window, she saw Jonathan Hartford's black Tesla pulling up to the front entrance. Jonathan Hartford was an impressive figure, standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with dark brown hair that was always perfectly styled and intelligent blue eyes that seemed to analyze everything around him. At 35, he had the confidence and bearing of someone who had achieved tremendous success at a young age. He typically wore expensive suits even when working from home, maintaining a professional appearance at all times. Grace quickly finished organizing Marcus's materials and prepared to leave the room before Jonathan arrived upstairs. She had learned that the Hartford parents preferred the staff to remain as invisible as possible, appearing only when needed and disappearing efficiently once their tasks were completed. However, as she was about to leave Marcus's room, she heard rapid footsteps on the main staircase, followed by Jonathan's voice calling out urgently, "Marcus! Marcus, where are you?" The panic in Jonathan's voice was unmistakable, and Grace immediately sensed that something was wrong. She opened Marcus's bedroom door to find Jonathan at the top of the stairs, his usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious distress. "He's here, Mr. Hartford," Grace called out. "In his room, perfectly safe." Jonathan's relief was visible as he hurried toward them. "Thank God. I just got a call from my security team. There was a break-in attempt at the Henderson estate last night. The family wasn't hurt, but they think it might have been someone targeting wealthy families in the neighborhood." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. The Henderson estate was only 3 blocks away from the Hartford mansion. She looked down at Marcus, who had become very quiet as he processed this information. "Are we safe, Dad?" Marcus asked, moving closer to Grace instinctively. Jonathan noticed his son's movement toward the maid and felt a complex mix of emotions. He realized that Marcus felt more comfortable seeking comfort from Grace than from his own father. The observation was both troubling and enlightening. "Yes, we're safe," Jonathan assured his son. "I'm having our security system upgraded immediately, and I'll be working from home for the next few days to make sure everything is properly installed." Grace began to excuse herself from the family conversation, but Jonathan stopped her. "Grace, I want to thank you for staying close to Marcus this morning. Mrs. Henderson told me that you often spend extra time with him during breakfast and help him with his daily routine." "It's my pleasure, Mr. Hartford," Grace replied professionally. "Marcus is a wonderful child." Jonathan studied Grace's face as she spoke. He had noticed her kindness toward Marcus before, but had never taken the time to really observe her interactions with his son. Now, seeing how naturally Marcus gravitated toward her for comfort, he realized that Grace provided something that he and Patricia had failed to give their son: consistent, caring attention. "I'd like to discuss expanding your responsibilities," Jonathan said, making a decision that surprised even himself. "Would you be interested in taking on some additional childcare duties? Marcus seems very comfortable with you, and with the current security concerns, I think it would be beneficial to have someone he trusts staying closer to him throughout the day." Grace was surprised by the offer. Her current position was primarily housekeeping and general domestic assistance. Taking on childcare responsibilities would be a significant change, but she genuinely cared about Marcus and could see that he needed more personal attention. "I would be honored to help care for Marcus in any way you think would be beneficial," Grace replied. "He's a special boy who deserves all the love and attention possible." Jonathan nodded, appreciating her diplomatic response. "We'll discuss the details later today. For now, would you mind staying with Marcus during his tutoring session? I need to handle some security arrangements, and I want to make sure he's not alone." "Of course, Mr. Hartford." As Jonathan left to attend to his business, Grace settled into a chair near Marcus's study area. She watched as the young boy organized his materials for his science lesson, noticing how he seemed more relaxed and focused when she was nearby. Marcus's tutor, Dr. Elizabeth Chun, arrived promptly at 9 o'clock. She was a highly qualified educator with advanced degrees in child development and elementary education. Patricia Hartford had hired her specifically because of her credentials and her experience working with children from wealthy families. Dr. Chun was professional and knowledgeable, but Grace observed that her teaching style was somewhat formal and distant. She focused on academic achievement and intellectual development, but didn't seem to connect with Marcus on an emotional level. Grace noticed that Marcus performed well in his lessons, but rarely seemed excited or enthusiastic about the learning process. During a break in the lesson, Dr. Chun stepped out to take a phone call, leaving Grace alone with Marcus. Immediately, the boy's posture relaxed, and he turned to Grace with a smile. "Do you want to see the cool experiment we did yesterday?" Marcus asked eagerly. "I'd love to see it," Grace replied, moving closer to his desk. Marcus pulled out a small container filled with iron filings and a powerful magnet. As he demonstrated how the magnet could create patterns in the metal pieces, his face lit up with genuine excitement. Grace asked questions about how the magnetism worked and why different shapes formed, encouraging Marcus to think critically about what he observed. "You know what's really cool?" Marcus said, his eyes sparkling with an idea. "My tutor said that the Earth is like a giant magnet too. That's why compasses work." "That is amazing," Grace replied, genuinely impressed by his understanding. "So if you had a compass right now, which way would it point?" Marcus thought for a moment, then pointed toward what he believed was north. Grace smiled at his confidence, even though his direction was slightly off. When Dr. Chin returned, she found Marcus more engaged and animated than usual. Grace quietly stepped back to allow the lesson to continue, but she noticed that Dr. Chin seemed surprised by Marcus's increased enthusiasm. The tutoring session continued for another hour, covering mathematics and reading comprehension. Grace observed from her chair, noting Marcus's learning style and the subjects that seemed to capture his interest most strongly. She began forming ideas about how she might supplement his formal education with more hands-on, experiential learning opportunities. After Dr. Chin left, Marcus asked if Grace could stay with him during his free time before lunch. They spent the next hour in the mansion's library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with thousands of volumes. Grace helped Marcus select age-appropriate books and read several stories aloud to him. As she read, Grace noticed Jonathan standing in the library doorway, watching their interaction. She wasn't sure how long he had been there, but something in his expression suggested that he was observing more than just checking on his son's activities. When their eyes met, Jonathan nodded approvingly before quietly walking away. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Henderson informed Grace that Mr. Hartford wanted to meet with her in his study at 4 o'clock to discuss her expanded role in the household. Grace felt nervous about the meeting, wondering exactly what Jonathan had in mind and whether she was prepared for additional responsibilities. The study was an impressive room lined with leather-bound books and expensive artwork. A large mahogany desk dominated the space, behind which sat two computer monitors and various electronic devices that Jonathan used to manage his business empire. He was reviewing documents when Grace knocked on the door. "Please, come in and have a seat," Jonathan said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Grace sat down, maintaining professional posture while feeling slightly intimidated by the formal setting. Jonathan closed the folder he had been reviewing and focused his full attention on her. "Grace, I've been observing your interactions with Marcus over the past few weeks, and I've noticed something important," Jonathan began. "My son responds to you in a way that he doesn't respond to other adults in his life. He seeks your attention, feels comfortable with you, and seems genuinely happy when you're around." Grace listened carefully, unsure whether this observation was leading to praise or criticism. "I realize that Patricia and I have been so focused on providing for Marcus financially and ensuring his academic development that we may have overlooked his emotional needs," Jonathan continued, his voice carrying a note of regret. "I want to change that, and I believe you could play an important role in helping us create a better environment for our son." "I'm honored that you think I could be helpful in that way," Grace replied. "Marcus is truly a special child, and I care about his well-being very much." Jonathan nodded. "I'm offering you a position as Marcus's personal caregiver and companion. This would involve being responsible for his daily routine, accompanying him to activities outside the house, and providing emotional support and guidance. The salary would be substantially higher than your current wages, and you would have your own suite of rooms in the mansion so that you could be available whenever Marcus needs you." The offer was far beyond what Grace had expected. A live-in position with significantly higher pay would solve many of her financial problems and allow her to save money toward her long-term goals. More importantly, she genuinely wanted to help Marcus develop into a happy, confident young man. "Mr. Hartford, I accept your offer gratefully," Grace said. "I promise to do everything in my power to provide Marcus with the care and attention he deserves. There is one condition," Jonathan added. "I want you to help me learn how to be a better father to my son. I recognize that I've been distant and distracted, but I want to change that. I'd like you to guide me in understanding what Marcus needs from me and how I can build a stronger relationship with him." This request surprised Grace even more than the job offer. She had 3 weeks had passed since Grace moved into the Hartford mansion as Marcus's personal caregiver, and the changes in the household dynamics were already becoming apparent. Grace had settled into her new suite of rooms on the second floor, which consisted of a comfortable bedroom, a small sitting area, and a private bathroom. The accommodations were more luxurious than any place she had ever lived, but, more importantly, they allowed her to be available for Marcus whenever he needed her. The morning routine had evolved into something much more structured and nurturing. Grace woke each day at 6 o'clock, prepared herself for the day, and then went to Marcus's room to gently wake him. Instead of the hurried, solitary breakfast he had previously endured, Marcus now enjoyed leisurely meals where he could share his thoughts and plans for the day with someone who genuinely listened and responded. On this particular Tuesday morning, Grace found Marcus already awake and sitting by his bedroom window, watching the gardeners work on the expansive lawn outside. The autumn leaves were beginning to change colors, creating a beautiful tapestry of reds, oranges, and yellows across the estate grounds. "Good morning, sweetheart," Grace said, settling into the chair beside him. "You're up early today. Did you sleep well?" Marcus nodded, but Grace could see something was troubling him. Over the past 3 weeks, she had become skilled at reading his moods and recognizing when something was bothering him. "Grace, do you think I'm weird because I don't go to regular school like other kids?" Marcus asked, his voice small and uncertain. The question revealed a deeper concern that Grace had suspected Marcus was struggling with. During their time together, she had noticed that he often asked about what other children his age were doing and seemed curious about the experiences he was missing by being educated at home. "You're not weird at all, honey," Grace replied gently. "You're getting an excellent education with your tutors, and you're learning things that many children your age haven't even heard of yet. But it's natural to wonder about different experiences. Sometimes I see kids playing in the park when we drive past, and They look like they're having so much fun together, Marcus continued. I wonder what it would be like to have friends who are kids like me instead of just adults. Grace had been thinking about this very issue. While Marcus's academic education was exceptional, his social development was lacking due to his isolation from peers. She had been planning to discuss this with Jonathan, but Marcus's direct question prompted her to address it immediately. You know what? Grace said, making a decision. Let's talk to your father about finding some opportunities for you to spend time with other children. There are lots of activities where you could meet kids your age and make friends. Marcus's face brightened with hope. Do you really think Dad would let me do that? I think your father wants you to be happy, and if spending time with other children would make you happy, then we should definitely explore that possibility. After breakfast, Grace accompanied Marcus to his morning tutoring session with Dr. Chun. Today's lesson focused on American history, specifically the colonial period and the founding of the United States. Grace noticed that while Marcus could memorize facts and dates easily, he seemed more engaged when Dr. Chun connected historical events to stories about real people and their daily lives. During a break in the lesson, Grace had an idea. Marcus, would you like to visit some of the historical sites we've been learning about? Boston has so many places where important events in American history actually happened. Dr. Chun overheard the suggestion and seemed intrigued. That's an excellent idea, Grace. Field trips can really enhance classroom learning by making abstract concepts more concrete and memorable. Could we really do that? Marcus asked excitedly. Could we go see where the Boston Tea Party happened? I don't see why not, Grace replied. We'll need to ask your father's permission and make sure proper security arrangements are made. But I think educational field trips would be wonderful for your learning. After the tutoring session ended, Grace made notes about potential educational outings that could supplement Marcus's formal education. She envisioned trips to historical sites, science museums, art galleries, and cultural events that would broaden his understanding of the world beyond the mansion walls. That afternoon, Jonathan returned from a business trip to California. Grace had been looking forward to his return because she wanted to discuss her observations about Marcus's social and emotional needs. She had also been curious about how Jonathan would adapt to her suggestions for building a stronger relationship with his son. Jonathan found Grace and Marcus in the mansion's game room, where they were working on a large jigsaw puzzle featuring a map of the world. Marcus was enthusiastically pointing out countries he had learned about in his geography lessons and asking Grace questions about different cultures and languages. Dad, Marcus called out when he saw his father in the doorway. Come see our puzzle. Grace is teaching me about all the places she wants to travel someday. Jonathan approached the table, genuinely interested in their activity. Over the past 3 weeks, he had made an effort to spend more time with Marcus, and Grace had noticed his increasing comfort in these interactions. This is impressive, son, Jonathan said, examining the partially completed puzzle. You've made real progress since I left yesterday. Grace watched as Marcus beamed at his father's praise. She had observed that Marcus craved approval and attention from Jonathan, and that even small acknowledgments of his achievements had a significant positive impact on his mood and confidence. Grace suggested that we could take trips to see some of these places in real life, Marcus said eagerly. She thinks it would help me understand geography and history better if I could actually visit the places we learn about. Jonathan looked at Grace with interest. That sounds like an excellent educational approach. What kinds of trips were you thinking about? Grace felt pleased that Jonathan seemed receptive to her suggestions. I was thinking we could start locally with visits to historical sites around Boston, then perhaps expand to places like Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia. There are also excellent science museums and cultural institutions that would complement Marcus's studies. I love the idea, Jonathan replied. Let's discuss the logistics later and see what we can arrange. As the afternoon progressed, Grace noticed that Jonathan seemed different since returning from his trip. He appeared more relaxed and was making genuine efforts to engage with Marcus rather than simply checking on his welfare. During dinner, Jonathan asked Marcus about his lessons, listened to his answers, and shared some stories about his own childhood experiences. After Marcus went to bed, Jonathan asked Grace to join him in the library for their weekly discussion about Marcus's progress and needs. These meetings had become an important part of their working relationship, allowing Grace to share her observations and suggestions while helping Jonathan understand his son's development. Grace, I want to thank you for the changes you've brought to this household. Jonathan began as they settled into comfortable chairs near the library's fireplace. Marcus is noticeably happier and more confident since you became his caregiver. But more than that, I'm learning things about my son that I never took the time to notice before. Marcus is a wonderful boy who just needed more personal attention and guidance, Grace replied. You're doing a great job of connecting with him. I can see how much he values the time you spend together. Jonathan smiled, but then his expression became more serious. There's something I need to discuss with you. My wife Patricia is returning from her month-long visit with her sister in Europe tomorrow. I should prepare you for the fact that she may not be entirely comfortable with the changes that have occurred while she's been away. Grace felt a flutter of concern. She had been wondering about Patricia's reaction to her expanded role in the household, especially since Patricia had not been consulted about the arrangement. Grace knew that Patricia could be demanding and particular about how the household was managed. Is there anything specific I should be aware of? Grace asked diplomatically. Jonathan considered his words carefully. Patricia has very definite ideas about how our household should function and what roles the staff should play. She may feel that I overstepped by making these changes without consulting her first. She's also protective of her position as Marcus's mother and may see your close relationship with him as threatening. Grace nodded, understanding the delicate situation. I want to assure you that I would never try to replace Mrs. Hartford in Marcus's life or interfere with their mother-son relationship. My goal is simply to provide additional support and care that helps Marcus thrive. I appreciate that, and I'll make sure Patricia understands your role and intentions, Jonathan said. However, I want you to know that regardless of any initial resistance she may have, I'm committed to maintaining the arrangement we've established. Marcus's well-being is my top priority, and I won't allow anything to compromise the progress he's made. The conversation continued for another hour, during which they discussed plans for educational field trips, strategies for helping Marcus develop social connections with peers, and approaches for maintaining the positive changes in family dynamics. Grace found herself impressed by Jonathan's genuine commitment to improving as a father and his willingness to make changes based on her recommendations. The next morning, Grace was preparing Marcus's breakfast when she heard the sound of a car in the driveway. Looking out the window, she saw a black limousine pulling up to the front entrance. Patricia Hartford had returned from Europe. Grace felt nervous as she finished preparing Marcus's meal. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that Patricia's reaction to the new arrangements would significantly impact her future in the Hartford household. Marcus seemed unaware of any potential tension as he chatted happily about the day's planned activities. Within minutes, Grace could hear Patricia's voice echoing through the mansion's main hall. Even from the kitchen, it was clear that Patricia was not pleased about something. Her tone was sharp and demanding as she spoke with Mrs. Henderson about various household matters. "Grace, is Mom home?" Marcus asked, hearing the familiar voice. "Yes, sweetheart. Your mother just arrived from her trip," Grace replied, trying to keep her voice calm and positive. Marcus seemed excited about his mother's return, but Grace noticed that he didn't immediately rush to greet her as he did when Jonathan came home. Instead, he finished his breakfast at a normal pace and asked Grace if she would accompany him when he went to see Patricia. Grace agreed to go with Marcus, knowing that this would likely be her first direct interaction with Patricia since the new arrangements had been implemented. As they walked through the mansion toward the main hall, Grace could hear Patricia's voice becoming more agitated. "What do you mean she's living here now?" Patricia was saying to Mrs. Henderson. "I specifically instructed that all household staff should maintain appropriate boundaries and professional distance." Grace felt her stomach tighten, but she maintained her composure as she and Marcus entered the main hall. Patricia stood near the grand staircase, still wearing an elegant traveling outfit and surrounded by expensive luggage. She was an imposing figure, tall and perfectly groomed, with an air of authority that commanded attention. "Mom," Marcus called out, running toward his mother with genuine enthusiasm. Patricia's expression softened immediately when she saw her son, and she knelt down to embrace him. "Hello, darling. I missed you so much while I was away." Grace stood back respectfully, allowing the mother and son to have their reunion moment. She noticed that while Patricia was affectionate with Marcus, her eyes kept drifting toward Grace with obvious curiosity and what appeared to be disapproval. "Marcus, why don't you tell your mother about some of the things you've been learning while she was away?" Grace suggested gently, hoping to focus attention on Marcus's achievements rather than on her own presence. Marcus began excitedly describing his recent lessons and the educational activities he had been enjoying. As he spoke, Patricia's attention gradually shifted from her concerns about household changes to genuine interest in her son's enthusiasm and articulate descriptions of his learning experiences. However, when Marcus mentioned that Grace had been helping him with his studies and spending time with him each day, Patricia's expression hardened again. She stood up slowly, her gaze fixing on Grace with unmistakable challenge. "I see," Patricia said coolly. "Marcus, why don't you go to your room and organize your things? I need to speak with Grace privately." Grace felt her heart rate increase, but she maintained professional composure as Marcus reluctantly left the room. She knew that this conversation would likely determine whether she would be able to continue in her new role or would need to return to her previous limited responsibilities. "I understand that my husband made some changes to your position while I was away," Patricia began, her tone formal and controlled. "I want to understand exactly what those changes entail and why they were made without consulting me." Mrs. Hartford, Mr. Hartford felt that Marcus would benefit from having someone provide additional personal attention and companionship. Grace replied respectfully. "I've been helping with his daily routine and educational activities, always with the goal of supporting his development and happiness." Patricia studied Grace's face, clearly evaluating both her words and her demeanor. "And you felt qualified to take on childcare responsibilities for my son?" The question was obviously intended to challenge Grace's credentials and authority. Grace chose her words carefully, knowing that her response would be crucial. "I would never presume to replace you as Marcus's mother or make decisions about his upbringing," Grace said sincerely. "I've simply tried to provide consistent, caring support that helps him feel secure and valued. Any guidance or educational assistance I've offered has been designed to complement the excellent foundation you and Mr. Hartford have established." Patricia seemed slightly surprised by Grace's diplomatic and respectful response. She had apparently expected defensiveness or presumption, and Grace's acknowledgement of Patricia's primary role as mother had diffused some of her initial hostility. "I'll need to discuss these arrangements with my husband before making any decisions about how to proceed," Patricia said finally. "For now, you may continue with your current responsibilities, but I'll be observing closely to ensure that appropriate boundaries are maintained." Grace nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartford. I hope you'll see that my only goal is to contribute positively to Marcus's well-being and to support your family in any way that's helpful." As Patricia walked away to find Jonathan, Grace felt a mixture of relief and continued concern. The initial confrontation had gone better than she had feared, but she knew that Patricia's acceptance of the new arrangements was far from guaranteed. Her future in the Hartford household would depend on her ability to demonstrate her value while respecting Patricia's position and authority. That evening, Grace could hear raised voices coming from Jonathan and Patricia's private suite. While she couldn't make out specific words, it was clear that they were having a heated discussion about the changes that had occurred during Patricia's absence. Grace tried to focus on helping Marcus with his evening routine, but she couldn't help worrying about the outcome of their conversation. Later that night, as Grace was reading in her room, she heard the trial month progressed with Grace walking a careful line between demonstrating her value to the Hartford family while being mindful not to overstep boundaries that might threaten Patricia's comfort. 2 weeks into this delicate period, Grace had begun to notice subtle changes in Patricia's attitude, though the wealthy woman remained guarded and observational rather than openly welcoming. On this crisp October morning, Grace was helping Marcus prepare for their first planned educational field trip to the Boston Tea Party Ships and Museum. The outing had been approved by both parents, though Patricia had insisted on specific security arrangements and a detailed itinerary before giving her consent. Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement as he put on his jacket and backpack. This would be his first significant excursion away from the mansion for educational purposes, and He had been counting down the days since Jonathan had confirmed the trip. "Grace, do you think I'll really be able to see the actual ship where they threw the tea overboard?" Marcus asked for the fifth time that morning, his green eyes bright with anticipation. "It's a replica of one of the ships, but it's built exactly like the original ones from 1773, Grace explained patiently, enjoying his enthusiasm. "You'll be able to walk on the deck and even participate in a reenactment of the tea party." Patricia appeared in the foyer just as Grace and Marcus were about to leave. She was impeccably dressed in a cream-colored designer suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Grace noticed that Patricia had been making more frequent appearances during Marcus's daily activities, clearly observing the interactions between caregiver and child. "Marcus, come here for a moment," Patricia called to her son. Marcus obediently went to his mother, who knelt down to adjust his jacket and smooth his hair with maternal care that was both genuine and performative. "I want you to stay close to Grace at all times," Patricia instructed. "Don't wander off, don't talk to strangers, and remember that you're representing our family. Be polite and well-behaved." "I will, Mom," Marcus promised earnestly. "Grace has already explained all the safety rules to me." Patricia glanced up at Grace with an expression that was difficult to read. "I'm trusting you to keep my son safe, and to ensure that this outing is both educational and appropriate." "Absolutely, Mrs. Hartford," Grace replied confidently. "I've coordinated with your security team, and we have a detailed plan for the entire day. Marcus will be safe, and we'll have a wonderful learning experience." The drive to the museum took 45 minutes through Boston traffic, with their security escort following discreetly in a separate vehicle. During the journey, Grace and Marcus reviewed what they had learned about the Boston Tea Party in his history lessons, discussing the political and economic factors that led to the colonists' protest against British taxation. Grace was impressed by Marcus's thoughtful questions and his ability to connect historical events to broader concepts of fairness and justice. His education had given him a sophisticated vocabulary and analytical thinking skills that were remarkable for a 7-year-old. "Grace, why didn't the colonists just write a letter to the king explaining why they thought the taxes were unfair?" Marcus asked as they approached the museum. "That's a really good question," Grace replied. "Actually, they did try to communicate with the British government through official channels for years before the Tea Party happened. When those attempts didn't work, they decided they needed to take more dramatic action to get their message across. So sometimes when people don't listen to words, you have to do something big to make them pay attention," Marcus observed. Grace was struck by the wisdom in his simple statement. "Yes, but it's important that the something big doesn't hurt anyone." The colonists were very careful to only destroy property, not to harm any people during the Tea Party. The museum experience exceeded Marcus's expectations. He participated enthusiastically in the interactive exhibits, asked intelligent questions of the historical interpreters, and showed genuine fascination with the replica ship and its authentic details. Grace watched him transform from a somewhat sheltered child into an engaged young learner who was making real connections between past and present. During the reenactment activity, Marcus was selected to help dump tea into Boston Harbor while dressed in period costume. His delight was infectious, and Grace found herself taking dozens of photos to capture his joy and engagement. She noticed that other children participating in the activity were drawn to Marcus's enthusiasm, and he began interacting naturally with peers for the first time in months. "Hey, are you from around here?" a boy about Marcus's age asked during a break between activities. "I live in Cambridge. My name's David." Marcus looked at Grace for guidance before responding. She nodded encouragingly, pleased to see him connecting with another child. "I'm Marcus. I live in Boston too," Marcus replied, though he didn't specify his exclusive neighborhood. "This is my first time coming here. It's really cool." "Same here," David said excitedly. "My mom and I are here with my history club from school. Do you want to explore the ship together?" Grace watched as Marcus and David spent the next hour examining the ship's features, discussing what life must have been like for sailors in the 1700s, and engaging in the kind of imaginative play that had been largely absent from Marcus's daily experience. She made mental notes about the importance of providing more opportunities for peer interaction. The educational value of the trip was evident, but Grace was even more pleased by Marcus's social development during these few hours away from the mansion. He was discovering confidence in interacting with children his own age and experiencing the joy of shared interests and collaborative exploration. As they prepared to leave the museum, David's mother approached Grace. She was a friendly woman in her 30s who introduced herself as Sarah Chun, and Grace was surprised to discover that she was Dr. Elizabeth Chen's sister and David's homeschooling coordinator. "I hope you don't mind me mentioning this," Sarah said, "but Elizabeth has told me wonderful things about the changes in Marcus's engagement and enthusiasm for learning since you became his caregiver. She's really impressed with the creative approaches you've suggested for making his education more experiential." Grace felt pleased but also somewhat concerned about discussing Marcus with someone outside the family, even if the connection was through his tutor. "Marcus is a naturally curious and intelligent child. I just try to help him explore his interests in different ways. Would you be interested in having Marcus participate in some group educational activities with other homeschooled children?" Sarah asked. "We organize field trips and learning experiences for about 8 children around Marcus's age. It might be good for him to have regular interaction with peers who share his academic interests." This suggestion aligned perfectly with Grace's observations about Marcus's need for social connections, but she knew she would need to discuss it carefully with both Jonathan and Patricia before making any commitments. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Grace replied. "I'll need to speak with Marcus's parents about it, but I think they would be very interested in exploring options for peer interaction." On the drive back to the mansion, Marcus couldn't stop talking about his experiences at the museum and his new friendship with David. Grace listened to his animated descriptions while mentally preparing for how she would present the day's events to Patricia and Jonathan. "Grace, do you think I could see David again sometime?" Marcus asked as they approached the mansion gates. "I think that's a possibility," Grace replied carefully. "We'll need to talk to your parents about it, but I believe they want you to have opportunities to make friends with other children." When they arrived home, Patricia was waiting in the main foyer, clearly eager to hear about the outing. Her questions were detailed and probing, focusing not only on the educational aspects of the trip, but also on Marcus's behavior, his interactions with other people, and any security concerns that had arisen. Marcus enthusiastically recounted his experiences, showing his mother the educational materials he had collected and describing the historical reenactment with infectious excitement. Grace was pleased to see that Patricia seemed genuinely interested in her son's learning and was asking follow-up questions that demonstrated real engagement with his experiences. "Mom, I made a friend named David, and his mom said there's a group of kids who go on educational trips together," Marcus said, his voice hopeful. "Do you think I could do that sometime?" Patricia's expression became more cautious. "We'll need to discuss that with your father and understand more about what would be involved." That evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, Grace was summoned to the library for what had become the regular weekly meeting with Jonathan and Patricia. This was the first time Patricia had participated in these discussions, and Grace felt nervous about how the dynamic might change. Jonathan was already seated in his usual chair when Grace arrived, and Patricia was positioned in a matching chair nearby. The formal arrangement suggested that this would be a more serious conversation than the informal discussions Grace had been having with Jonathan alone. "Grace, we want to hear your detailed assessment of today's field trip," Patricia began, taking the lead in the conversation. "We need to understand both the benefits and any concerns that arose during the outing." Grace provided a comprehensive summary of the day's events, emphasizing Marcus's educational engagement, his positive social interactions, and his demonstrated ability to handle himself appropriately in a public setting with other children and adults. She was careful to present factual observations rather than interpretations, allowing the parents to draw their own conclusions. "I was particularly impressed by his thoughtful questions and his ability to connect historical events to broader concepts," Grace concluded. "He also showed remarkable social skills when interacting with other children, which suggests he's ready for more peer interaction opportunities." Jonathan nodded approvingly. "This confirms what I've been observing about Marcus's increased confidence and curiosity. The change in his overall demeanor since Grace joined our household has been remarkable." Patricia was quiet for several moments, clearly processing the information and considering her response. When she spoke, her tone was more thoughtful and less defensive than Grace had expected. "I can see that Marcus benefited from today's experience," Patricia admitted. "I'm still concerned about security and about ensuring that he doesn't become too comfortable with people outside our immediate circle, but I recognize that he needs some exposure to the outside world." "What are your thoughts about the group educational activities that Sarah Chin mentioned?" Grace asked carefully. Patricia exchanged a look with Jonathan before responding. "We'll need to investigate that thoroughly. If we decide to allow Marcus to participate, it would need to be under carefully controlled circumstances with appropriate security measures." Jonathan leaned forward in his chair. "Grace, I want you to know that Patricia and I have been discussing your role in our family extensively over the past 2 weeks. We've both observed the positive changes in Marcus, and we've seen how much he trusts and relies on you." Grace felt her heart rate increase, unsure whether this observation was leading to good or difficult news. Patricia took a deep breath before speaking. "I'll be honest with you, Grace. When I returned from Europe and learned about the changes Jonathan had made, I was not pleased. I felt that boundaries had been crossed and that my authority as Marcus's mother had been undermined." Grace remained silent, recognizing that Patricia needed to express these feelings before moving to whatever conclusion she and Jonathan had reached. However, Patricia continued, "I've spent the past 2 weeks watching your interactions with my son, and I've seen how he's flourished under your care. More importantly, I've seen that you've never attempted to replace me or to undermine my relationship with Marcus. You've simply provided additional support and attention that has helped him become more confident and engaged." Grace felt a wave of relief beginning to build, though she remained cautious about expressing premature optimism. Jonathan smiled as he prepared to deliver what Grace hoped would be positive news. "Patricia and I have decided that we want to make your position as Marcus's caregiver permanent, with expanded responsibilities and a significant increase in compensation." The relief Grace felt was overwhelming, but she managed to maintain professional composure as she responded. "Thank you both for giving me this opportunity. I'm honored by your trust, and I promise to continue putting Marcus's well-being above everything else." 6 months had transformed the Hartford household in ways that none of them could have anticipated when Grace first moved into her expanded role as Marcus's caregiver. The winter months had brought a rhythm and warmth to the mansion that had been missing for years, with Marcus thriving under consistent care and Jonathan discovering aspects of fatherhood he had never experienced. On this snowy February morning, Grace was in the kitchen preparing a special breakfast to celebrate Marcus's acceptance into the Cambridge Young Scholars Program, a selective educational group that Sarah Chun had recommended. After weeks of applications, interviews, and background checks that satisfied Patricia's security concerns, Marcus had been chosen to participate in advanced learning activities with 12 other exceptionally bright children from the Boston area. The kitchen had become one of Grace's favorite spaces in the mansion, not because of her duties, but because it was where some of the family's most meaningful conversations took place. Marcus often did his homework at the large center island while Grace prepared meals, creating opportunities for informal learning and discussion that supplemented his formal education. "Grace, do you think the other kids in the program will like me?" Marcus asked, looking up from the math problems he was working on before breakfast. His question revealed the mixture of excitement and anxiety he felt about expanding his social circle. "I think they're going to love you," Grace replied confidently while flipping pancakes on the griddle. "You're kind, curious, and interesting to talk to. Those are the qualities that make good friends." Over the past months, Marcus had participated in several group activities organized by Sarah Chun, and each experience had increased his confidence in social situations. However, the Young Scholars Program represented a more significant commitment and would involve regular weekly meetings with the same group of children for the entire spring semester. Jonathan entered the kitchen still wearing his exercise clothes from his morning workout, a routine he had adopted as part of his efforts to maintain better work-life balance. Grace had been pleased to observe how Jonathan's commitment to being more present in Marcus's life had extended to taking better care of his own health and well-being. "Good morning, you two." Jonathan said, kissing the top of Marcus's head and nodding warmly to Grace. How's the math homework coming along? I finished all the problems, and Grace checked my work, Marcus replied proudly. She showed me a different way to think about division that makes it easier. Jonathan looked at the homework with genuine interest, something that would have been unlikely before Grace joined their household. This is impressive work, son. You're really excelling in mathematics. Grace had worked carefully over the months to encourage Jonathan's involvement in Marcus's daily activities and academic progress. She had learned to create opportunities for father-son interaction while gradually stepping back to allow their relationship to develop naturally. The effort had been successful, with Jonathan now taking active interest in homework, bedtime stories, and weekend activities. Patricia appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed for her morning volunteer work at the Boston Children's Hospital Charity Board. Her relationship with Grace had evolved considerably since the initial tension over the caregiver's expanded role. While they maintained professional boundaries, Patricia had developed genuine respect for Grace's dedication to Marcus and her positive influence on the family dynamics. Grace, I wanted to remind you that Marcus has his dental appointment at 2 o'clock today, Patricia said, consulting the family calendar on her phone. Dr. Williams specifically requested that you accompany him since you're familiar with his anxiety about medical procedures. This request illustrated how fully Grace had been integrated into Marcus's care team. Over the months, various professionals who worked with the family had come to recognize Grace as Marcus's primary advocate and support person, someone who understood his needs and could help him navigate challenging situations. Of course, Mrs. Hartford, Grace replied. I've already prepared some breathing exercises and distraction techniques that have helped him with previous appointments. Marcus looked up from his breakfast with obvious relief. You'll stay with me the whole time? Absolutely, Grace assured him. We'll practice the breathing exercises in the car, and I'll be right there with you. As the family finished breakfast together, Grace reflected on how natural these morning interactions had become. What had once been a formal, distant household had evolved into something that felt genuinely warm and connected, though she was always mindful of maintaining appropriate boundaries and respecting the family's privacy and authority. The day proceeded with its usual rhythm of tutoring sessions, educational activities, and care routines. Marcus's academic performance had improved significantly since Grace began supplementing his formal education with creative projects and hands-on learning experiences. Dr. Chen regularly commented on his increased engagement and deeper understanding of concepts across all subject areas. During lunch, Grace received an unexpected phone call from her former neighbor in Detroit, bringing news that made her heart race with anxiety. Mrs. Johnson, who had been keeping an eye on Grace's old apartment building, called to inform her that a developer was planning to demolish the building where Grace's grandmother had lived for 30 years. They want to put up luxury condos, Mrs. Johnson explained sadly. The city is offering relocation assistance, but a lot of us older folks don't know where we'll go. I thought you'd want to know since your grandmother loved that place so much. After ending the call, Grace felt emotionally conflicted. The apartment building represented her last connection to her grandmother's memory and her own roots in Detroit. At the same time, she had built a new life in Boston that was more fulfilling and stable than anything she had previously experienced. Marcus noticed Grace's subdued mood during their afternoon activities and asked if something was wrong. Grace was touched by his sensitivity and concern, but she didn't want to burden him with her personal problems. I received some news about my old neighborhood in Detroit, Grace explained carefully. Sometimes when things change in places that are important to us, it can make us feel sad even when good things are happening in our current life. Marcus nodded with the wisdom that often surprised adults. Like when we moved my fish tank to a bigger room. The new place was better for the fish, but I felt sad about leaving the old spot because I had good memories there. Grace smiled at his thoughtful analogy. That's exactly right, sweetheart. Change can be good and difficult at the same time. That evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, Grace found herself in the mansion's library, looking through photo albums she had brought from Detroit. The pictures showed her grandmother's modest apartment, the neighborhood where Grace had grown up, and memories of a simpler time when her biggest dreams involved starting a small cleaning business. Jonathan found her there, sitting in one of the comfortable reading chairs with photographs scattered on the table beside her. "Grace, is everything all right?" he asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Marcus mentioned that you seemed upset about something today." Grace felt surprised that Marcus had shared his observation with his father, but also pleased that their communication had become open enough for him to express concerns about people he cared about. "I received news about my old neighborhood in Detroit," Grace explained. "The building where my grandmother lived is being demolished for redevelopment. It's bringing up a lot of memories and making me think about the path my life has taken." Jonathan listened carefully as Grace shared some of her history and her complicated feelings about how far she had come from her humble beginnings. She found herself opening up more than she had intended, perhaps because Jonathan had become not just her employer, but someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. "It sounds like your grandmother was an important influence in your life," Jonathan observed. "The values and work ethic she taught you are evident in everything you do for our family. She always told me that kindness and hard work would eventually be rewarded," Grace replied. "I think she would be amazed by the opportunities I've found here. But I also know she'd want me to remember where I came from and to help others when I can." Jonathan was quiet for several moments before speaking. "Grace, I hope you know how much you've changed our family's life. When you first came to work for us, this house felt more like a business operation than a home. Marcus was polite but distant. Patricia and I were focused on our professional obligations, and we were all going through the motions of family life without really connecting with each other." Grace felt touched by his honesty about the family's previous dynamics, though she was also aware that such personal revelations represented a significant shift in their relationship boundaries. "You've helped us become a real family," Jonathan continued. "Marcus is confident and happy. Patricia has rediscovered joy in motherhood, and I've learned what it means to be an engaged father rather than just a provider. We're all better people because of your influence." The conversation continued for another hour, during which Jonathan shared his own reflections on family, success, and the importance of surrounding oneself with people who bring out the best in others. Grace found herself seeing Jonathan not just as a wealthy employer, but as a thoughtful, caring man who was working to become the person he wanted to be. As they prepared to end their conversation, Jonathan made an unexpected suggestion. "Grace, what would you think about establishing a scholarship or community development fund in your grandmother's memory? We could focus on supporting educational opportunities for children from backgrounds similar to yours, or helping families facing the kind of displacement that's happening in your old neighborhood." The proposal took Grace completely by surprise. The idea of honoring her grandmother's memory through charitable work that could help other families facing similar challenges felt both overwhelming and deeply meaningful. "That's incredibly generous, Mr. Hartford," Grace replied, struggling to process the magnitude of his suggestion. "I would be honored to be involved in something like that, but I wouldn't know how to begin organizing such a project." "We could work on it together," Jonathan said. "I have experience with charitable foundations, and Patricia has connections with nonprofit organizations through her volunteer work. We could create something significant that makes a real difference in people's lives." As Grace walked back to her room that evening, she felt as though her life was entering another period of unexpected change and opportunity. The conversation with Jonathan had revealed dimensions of their relationship that went beyond her role as Marcus's caregiver, though she remained mindful of maintaining appropriate professional boundaries. More importantly, the possibility of channeling her grandmother's values into meaningful charitable work felt like a way to honor Eleanor's memory while using her current position to help others who faced the challenges she had once confronted herself. Before going to sleep, Grace looked out her bedroom window. The spring evening air carried the scent of blooming flowers through the open windows of the Hartford Mansion's conservatory, where Grace sat reading to Marcus from his favorite adventure novel. Nearly a year had passed since she had first moved into her expanded role as his caregiver, and the relationship between them had deepened into something that felt genuinely familial while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Marcus, now 8 years old, had grown both physically and emotionally during their time together. His confidence in social situations had blossomed through his participation in the Young Scholars Program, where he had formed genuine friendships with several children who shared his intellectual curiosity and kind nature. More importantly, his relationship with both parents had strengthened significantly, with Jonathan becoming an actively engaged father and Patricia rediscovering the joys of motherhood. Grace, do you think the main character makes the right choice when he decides to help the other children even though it might get him in trouble? Marcus asked, referring to a moral dilemma in their current chapter. What do you think? Grace replied, using the question as a teaching moment. Do you believe it's always right to help others, even when there might be consequences for yourself? Marcus considered the question seriously, as he had learned to do when Grace presented him with ethical scenarios. I think if someone really needs help and you're the only one who can provide it, then you have a responsibility to try, even if it's risky for you. Grace smiled at his thoughtful response, recognizing the moral reasoning skills that had developed through their many conversations about literature, history, and real-life situations. Marcus was growing into a young person who thought deeply about right and wrong, considering the impact of his actions on others. Their reading session was interrupted by Jonathan's arrival in the conservatory, carrying a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. Patricia followed close behind him, her face glowing with happiness that immediately captured both Grace's and Marcus's attention. We have some wonderful news to share with both of you, Jonathan announced, setting the champagne on the small table near their reading area. Marcus immediately moved closer to his parents, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. Grace remained seated but gave them her full attention, curious about what had generated such obvious joy in both adults. Patricia and I have been discussing some major changes to our family structure, Jonathan continued, his voice filled with emotion. Changes that will affect all of us in very positive ways. Patricia took over the explanation, her usual formal demeanor softened by genuine warmth. Grace, over the past year, you've become so much more than an employee in our household. You've become family to us, especially to Marcus, and we want to make that relationship official and permanent. Grace felt her heart rate increase, uncertain about what official and permanent might mean, but sensing that this conversation would be life-changing in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Jonathan stepped forward, his expression serious but kind. Grace, I'm asking you to marry me. The words seemed to hang in the air for several long seconds while Grace processed what she had just heard. Marcus looked confused but excited, sensing the magnitude of the moment even if he didn't fully understand its implications. Patricia watched Grace's face carefully, her expression encouraging and supportive. I know this must be shocking, Jonathan continued, his voice gentle and understanding. And I want you to know that this isn't a decision we've made lightly or suddenly. Patricia and I have been discussing this possibility for months, and we've both come to realize that what we've built together over this past year is much more than a professional relationship. Grace felt overwhelmed by competing emotions, surprise, confusion, gratitude, and something deeper that she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge fully until this moment. Over the months, her respect and affection for Jonathan had grown beyond what she had recognized as appropriate for their professional relationship, but she had carefully maintained boundaries to protect both her position and her emotional well-being. Mr. Hartford, I don't know what to say, Grace managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia moved closer, sitting down beside Grace with uncharacteristic warmth and informality. Grace, I know this seems sudden, but the truth is that Jonathan and I realized months ago that our marriage had become more of a business partnership than a loving relationship. We care about each other deeply, and we're committed to remaining friends and co-parents, but we've both acknowledged that we're not in love with each other anymore. What we've observed over this past year is how naturally you and Jonathan connect with each other, and how much happiness you bring to both him and Marcus, Patricia continued. We've also seen how Jonathan's feelings for you have evolved beyond professional respect into something much deeper. Jonathan nodded, taking Grace's hand gently. Grace, a year ago, she had been a struggling domestic worker with limited prospects and significant debt. Now she was being invited to become part of one of Boston's most prominent families, not as an employee, but as an equal partner and mother. I need some time to process this, Grace said finally, her voice shaking with emotion. "This is beyond anything I ever imagined possible, and I want to make sure I can respond thoughtfully rather than just reacting to the surprise." Jonathan nodded understandingly. "Of course, take all the time you need. I know it's a lot to consider, and there are practical and emotional complexities that we'll need to work through together." Patricia stood up and moved toward the door, gesturing for Jonathan and Marcus to follow her. "Grace, why don't you have some time alone to think? We'll be in the library when you're ready to continue the conversation, but there's no pressure to decide anything tonight." As the three of them left the conservatory, Grace found herself alone with thoughts and feelings that seemed too large for her to contain. She walked to the windows overlooking the mansion's gardens, where the last light of day was creating long shadows across the perfectly manicured landscape. The proposal represented everything she had never dared to dream of: financial security, social position, the chance to raise Marcus as her own son, and marriage to a man she had come to love and respect deeply. Yet it also meant stepping into a world where she would be scrutinized as the former domestic worker who married her billionaire employer, a narrative that would likely generate significant public attention and criticism. More importantly, Grace needed to examine her own feelings honestly. Did she love Jonathan for himself, or was she overwhelmed by gratitude for the opportunities he had provided? Could she navigate the complexities of becoming Marcus's stepmother while maintaining a positive relationship with Patricia? Was she prepared for the challenges that would come with being married to one of America's most prominent businessmen? After an hour of reflection, Grace realized that her answer had been clear from the moment Jonathan asked the question, even if she needed time to process the implications. She loved Jonathan Hartford, not as an employer or benefactor, but as a man who had shown her kindness, respect, and genuine partnership in caring for his son. She loved Marcus as though he were her own child, and the opportunity to make that relationship official felt like a gift beyond measure. Most importantly, she recognized that her grandmother's teachings about kindness and hard work leading to unexpected rewards had prepared her for exactly this moment. Eleanor had always told her that good things would come to those who remained true to their values while working to improve themselves and help others. This proposal was the culmination of that promise. Grace walked back through the mansion toward the library, feeling nervous but resolved. As she approached the room where the Hartford family was waiting, she could hear Marcus's voice asking his parents questions about weddings and what it would mean to have Grace as his stepmother officially. When she entered the library, three faces turned toward her expectantly. Grace looked directly at Jonathan, her heart full of love and determination. "Jonathan, I would be honored to marry you," she said, her voice clear and confident. "I love you, I love Marcus, and I want to build a life together as a family." The room erupted in celebration, with Marcus jumping up to hug Grace, while Jonathan moved toward her with tears of joy in his eyes. Patricia watched the scene with obvious satisfaction, pleased that her unconventional plan for her family's future was coming together exactly as she had hoped. "There's one more surprise," Patricia announced as the initial excitement settled. "Jonathan and I have been working with lawyers to establish the Eleanor Williams Foundation for Educational Opportunity, named in honor of Grace's grandmother. Grace will serve as the foundation's director, focusing on providing scholarships and support services for children from backgrounds similar to her own." Grace felt overwhelmed by this additional gesture of respect and inclusion. Not only were they offering her marriage and motherhood, but they were also providing a way for her to honor her grandmother's memory while pursuing meaningful work that aligned with her values and experiences. "We want you to know that this marriage is about love and family, not about changing who you are or where you came from," Jonathan said, taking Grace's hands in his. "Your background, your experiences, and your values are part of what makes you the person I've fallen in love with. We want to build a life together that honors both of our histories while creating something new and wonderful for our family." As the evening continued with planning discussions and celebration, Grace felt as though she was living in a dream that somehow managed to be even better than anything she could have imagined. The little girl who had grown up in poverty in Detroit, who had worked multiple jobs to care for her aging grandmother, who had taken a temporary domestic position to pay off medical debts, was about to become the wife of a billionaire and the official mother to a wonderful little boy who had already captured her heart completely. The fairy tale was real, but it was grounded in genuine love, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to creating a family built on kindness, integrity, and care for others. Grace's grandmother had been right about the power of goodness to transform lives in unexpected ways. The reward for her years of dedication and kindness was greater than anything Eleanor could have imagined, but it was also exactly what she had promised would come to those who remained true to their values while working to help others. 6 months later, Grace Williams became Grace Hartford in a beautiful ceremony held in the mansion's gardens, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues who had come to celebrate the love story that had transformed all their lives. Marcus served as ring bearer, beaming with pride as he officially gained the mother he had always wanted. Patricia stood as Grace's matron of honor, symbolizing the unique friendship that had developed between them. As Grace and Jonathan exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through all of life's challenges and joys, Grace thought about her grandmother watching from above and smiled through her tears of happiness. The woman who had taught her that kindness and hard work would eventually be rewarded was surely pleased to see how magnificently that promise had been fulfilled. The mansion's beautifully landscaped grounds, illuminated by soft lighting that made the snow-covered gardens look like something from a fairy tale. A year ago, she could never have imagined living in such surroundings or being trusted with the care and education of a child from one of Boston's wealthiest families. Yet as she reflected on the path that had brought her to this place, Grace realized that every experience in her life had prepared her for this role. Her difficult childhood had taught her empathy for others who struggled. Her grandmother's example had shown her the power of kindness and dedication. Her financial hardships had helped her appreciate the value of stability and opportunity. Most importantly, her genuine love for Marcus and her commitment to his well-being had created connections with the Hartford family that went far beyond a typical employer-employee relationship. She was becoming part of something that felt like a real family, though she remained aware that her position was still dependent on maintaining the trust and respect she had worked so hard to earn. As Grace drifted off to sleep, she thought about the scholarship fund idea and the possibilities it might create for helping other young people achieve their dreams despite challenging circumstances. Perhaps her grandmother's prediction about kindness and hard work being rewarded was coming true in ways that neither of them could have imagined. The thought filled her with gratitude and determination to continue earning the remarkable opportunities that had come into her life. Patricia nodded formally. There will be conditions and expectations that we'll need to discuss in detail, but we believe that continuing this arrangement is in Marcus's best interest. As the meeting concluded, Grace reflected on how much her life had changed over the past few months. She had gone from being a temporary domestic worker to becoming an integral part of a wealthy family's household, with responsibilities and opportunities she had never imagined possible. More importantly, she had found a sense of purpose and fulfillment in caring for Marcus that reminded her of her grandmother's teachings about the importance of kindness and dedication in building meaningful relationships. Eleanor would have been proud to see how Grace's commitment to caring for others had led to such unexpected opportunities and recognition. Walking back to her suite of rooms that evening, Grace felt grateful for the path that had brought her to this place in her life. She also felt the weight of responsibility for continuing to earn the trust that the Hartford family had placed in her. Marcus deserved the best care and guidance she could provide, and she was determined to help him grow into the confident, compassionate young man she knew he could become. As she prepared for bed, Grace could hear Marcus in his room next door, talking quietly to himself as he often did while settling down for the night. Tonight, his quiet words were filled with excitement about his museum adventure and hopes for future activities with new friends. The happiness in his voice confirmed for Grace that she was making a real difference in his young life, and that knowledge filled her with deep satisfaction and renewed commitment to her role in the Hartford family. A soft knock on her door. Opening it, she found Jonathan standing in the hallway, looking tired but determined. "Grace, I wanted to update you on my conversation with Patricia," Jonathan said quietly. She's agreed to give the current arrangement a trial period of 1 month. During that time, she'll observe how things are working and make her final decision about whether to continue with your expanded role. Grace felt both relief and pressure at this news. Thank you for supporting the arrangement, Mr. Hartford. I'll do everything possible to prove that this is beneficial for Marcus and your family. Jonathan nodded. I have complete confidence in you, Grace. Patricia will come to see what I've already observed, that you're providing exactly what Marcus needs to thrive. Just continue doing what you've been doing, and I believe everything will work out well. As Jonathan walked back toward his own room, Grace felt the weight of the next month settling on her shoulders. She was determined to prove herself worthy of the trust that Jonathan had placed in her, and to show Patricia that her presence in the household was an asset rather than a threat. Most importantly, she was committed to continuing to provide Marcus with the love, attention, and guidance that was helping him develop into a confident, happy young boy. Ever imagined that a billionaire would ask a domestic worker for advice about parenting? But she could see the sincerity in Jonathan's expression. I would be happy to help with that, Grace replied. Marcus loves you very much, and I believe that with some changes in approach, you could develop a wonderful relationship with him. As their meeting concluded, Grace felt a mixture of excitement and responsibility settling over her. She was about to embark on a new chapter in her life, one that would bring her closer to both Marcus and his father than she had ever imagined possible. That evening, as Grace packed her belongings in her small apartment to prepare for moving into the mansion, she reflected on the unexpected turn her life was taking. She thought about her grandmother Eleanor, who had always taught her that kindness and hard work would eventually be rewarded. Perhaps this opportunity was the beginning of the reward Eleanor had promised would come.